"Godspeed to you and a safe journey this night to you, Charlie," ejaculated the master of the little Sheban house at Ballyhooly after his old friend and good customer, Charlie Culnane, who at length turned his face homeward with the prospect of a dreary ride, and as dark a night as ever fell upon the Blackwater along the banks of which he was about to journey. Charlie Culnane knew the country well, and moreover was a bold rider as any Mallow boy that ever rattled a 4-year-old upon the Drumroo racecourse. He had gone to Fermoy in the morning as well for the purpose of purchasing some ingredients required for the Christmas dinner by his wife, as to gratify his own vanity by having new reins fitted to his snaffle, in which he attended showing off the old mare at the approaching St. Stephen's Day's hunt. Charlie did not get out of Fermoy until late, for although he was not one of your nasty particular sort of fellows in anything that related to the common occurrences of life, yet in all the appointments connected with hunting, riding, leaping, in short, whatever was connected with the old mare, Charlie, the saddler said, was the devil to please. An illustration of this fastidiousness was afforded by his going such a distance for his snaffle bridle. Mallow was a full 12 miles nearer Charlie's farm, which lay just 3/4 of a mile below Carrick than Fermoy. But Charlie had quarrelled with all the Mallow saddlers, from hard-working and hard-drinking Tim Clancy to Mr. Ryan, who wrote himself saddler to the Dull Hollow Hunt, and no one could content him in all the particulars but the honest Michael Towmey of Fermoy, who used to assert, and who will doubt it, that he could stitch a saddle better than the Lord Lieutenant, although they made him all as one king over Ireland. This delay in the arrangement of the snaffle bridle did not allow Charlie Culnane to pay so long a visit as he had first intended to his old friend and gossip, Con Buckley, of the Harp of Erin. Con, however, knew the value of time and insisted Charlie make good use of what he had to spare. "I won't bother you waiting for water, Charlie, because I think you'll have enough of the same before you get home. So drink off your liquor, man. It's as good parliament as ever a gentleman tasted. Aye, and Holy Church too, for it will bear X waters and carry the bead after that may be." Charlie, it must be confessed, nothing loath, drank success to Con and success to the jolly Harp of Erin, with its head of beauty and its strings of the hair of gold, and to their better acquaintance, and so on, from the bottom of his soul, until the side of Castle Roche, and that he had got no further on his journey than his gossip at Ballyhooly, close to the big gate of Connemore. Catching hold of his oil-skin hat, therefore, whilst Con Buckley went to the cupboard for another bottle of the real stuff, he regularly, as it is termed, bolted from his friend's hospitality, darted to the stable, tightened his girths, and put the old mare into a canter towards home. The road from Ballyhooly to Carrick follows pretty nearly the course of the Blackwater, occasionally diverging from the rivers and passing through the rather wild scenery when contrasted with the beautiful seats that adorn its banks. Charlie cantered gaily, regardless of the rain, which, as his friend Con has anticipated, fell in torrents. The good woman's currants and raisins were carefully packed between the folds of the yeomanry cloak, which Charlie, who was proud of showing that he belonged to the Royal Mallow Light Horse Volunteers, always strapped to the saddle before him, and took care never to destroy the military effect of by putting it on. Away he went, singing like a thrush. "Sporting, bellying, dancing, drinking, breaking windows, sinking, ever aching, never thinking, live the race of the Mallow, spending faster than it comes, beating and Dunstan Hollow's true begotten sons, live the rakes of Mallow." Notwithstanding that the visit to the jolly Harp of Erin had little increased the natural complacency of his mind, the drenching of the new snaffle reins began to disturb him, and then followed a train of more anxious thoughts than even were occasioned by the dread of defeat of the pride of his long-anticipated turnout on St. Stephen's Day. In an hour of good fellowship, when his heart was warm and his head was not overcool, Charlie had bucked the old mare against Mr. Jepson's bay, filly Desdemona for a neat 100, and He now felt sore misgivings as to the prudence of the match. In a less gay tone, he continued, "Living short but merry lives, going where the devil drives, keeping, he muttered. As the old mare reduced her canter to a trot at the bottom of Kilcummer Hill, Charlie's eyes fell on the old walls that belonged, in former times, to the Templars. But the silent gloom of the ruin was broken only by the heavy rains which splashed and pattered on the gravestones. He then looked up at the sky to see if there was, among the clouds, any hopes for mercy on his new snaffle reins, and no sooner were his eyes lowered than his attention was arrested by an object so extraordinary as almost led him to doubt the evidence of his senses. The head, apparently, of a white horse, with short cropped ears, large open nostrils, and immense eyes, seemed to rapidly follow him. No connection with the body, legs, or rider could possibly be traced. The head advanced. Charlie's old mare, too, was moved at the unnatural sight, snorting violently, increasing her trot up the hill. The head moved forward and passed on. Charlie, pursuing it with astonished gaze, and wondering by what means and for what purpose this detached head thus proceeded through the air, and did not perceive the corresponding body until he was suddenly startled by finding it close at his side. Charlie turned to examine what was thus so sociably jogging on with him, when a most unexampled apparition presented itself to his view. A figure whose height, judging as well by the obscurity of the night would permit him, he computed to be at least 8 feet, was seated on the body and legs of a white horse a full 18 hands and a half high. In this measurement Charlie could not be mistaken, for his own mare was exactly 15 hands, and the body that thus jogged alongside he could at once determine, from his practice in horseflesh, was at least 3.5 hands higher. After the first feeling of astonishment, which found vented in the exclamation, "I'm sold now forever," was over, the attention of Charlie, being a keen sportsman, was naturally directed to this extraordinary body, and having examined it with the eye of a connoisseur, he proceeded to reconnoitre the figure so unusually mounted, who had hitherto remained perfectly mute, wishing to see whether his companion's silence proceeded from bad temper, want of conversational powers, or from a distaste to water and a fear that the opening of his mouth might subject him to have it filled by the rain, which was then drifted into violent gusts against him. Charlie endeavored to catch a sight of his companion's face in order to form an opinion of that point. But his vision had failed in carrying him further than the top of the collar of the figure's coat, which was a scarlet single-breasted hunting frock, having a waist of very old-fashioned cut reaching to the saddle with 2 huge shining buttons at about a yard's distance behind. "I ought to see farther than this, too," thought Charlie, "although he is mounted on his high horse like my cousin Darby, who was made barony constable last week, unless 'tis Con's whiskey that has made me blind entirely." However, see farther he could not, and after straining his eye for a considerable time to no purpose, he exclaimed with pure vexation, "By the Bridge of Marlow, it is no head at all he has." "Look again, Charlie Culnane," said a hoarse voice that seemed to proceed from under the right arm of the figure. Charlie did look again, and now in the proper place, for he clearly saw, under the aforesaid right arm, that head from which the voice had proceeded, and such a head no mortal had ever saw before. It looked like cream cheese hung round with black puddings. No speck of color enlivened the ashy paleness of the depressed features. The skin lay stretched over the unearthly surface, almost like the parchment head of a drum. 2 fiery eyes of prodigious circumference, with a strange and irregular motion, flashed like meteors upon Charlie. And to complete all, a mouth reached from either extremity of 2 ears, which peeped forth from under a profusion of matted locks of lustrous blackness. This head, which the figure had evidently hitherto concealed from Charlie's eyes, now burst upon his view in all its hideousness. Charlie, although a lad of proverbial courage in the country of Cork, yet could not but feel his nerves a little shaken by the unexpected visit from the Headless Horseman, whom he considered his fellow-traveller must be. The cropped-eared head of the gigantic horse moved steadily forward, always keeping from 6 to 8 yards in advance. The horseman, unaided by whip or spur, and disdaining the use of stirrups, which dangled uselessly from the saddle, followed at a trot by Charlie's side, his hideous head now lost behind the lappet of his coat, now staring forth in all its horror as the motion of the horse caused his arms to move to and fro. The ground shook under the weight of its supernatural burden, and the water in the pools became agitated into waves as he trotted by them. On they went, heads without bodies and bodies without heads. The deadliest of silence of the night was broken only by the feral clattering of hooves, and the distant sounds of thunder, which rumbled the mystic hills of Caucaine, Mona Finia. Charlie, who was naturally a merry-hearted and rather talkative fellow, had hitherto felt tongue-tied by apprehension, but finding his companion showed no evil disposition towards him, and having become somewhat more reconciled to the Patagonian dimensions of the horseman and his headless steed, plucked up all his courage, and thus addressed the stranger. "Why then your honour rides mighty well without the stirrups?" growled the head from under the horseman's right arm. "'Tis not an over-civil answer," thought Charlie, but no matter. He was taught in one of them riding houses, and maybe thinks nothing at all of bumping leather breeches at the rate of 10 miles an hour. "I'll try him on another track." "Ahem," said Charlie, clearing his throat, and feeling at the same time rather daunted at the second attempt to establish conversation. "Ahem. That's a mighty neat coat of your honour's, although 'tis a little too long in the waist for present cunt." growled the head again. This second hump was a terrible thump in the face to poor Charlie, who was fairly bothered to know what subject he could start that would prove more agreeable. "'Tis a sensible head," thought Charlie, "although an ugly one, for 'tis plain enough the man does not like flattery." A third attempt, however, Charlie was determined to make, and having failed in his observations as to the riding and the coat of his fellow-traveller, he thought he would just drop a trifling allusion to the wonderful headless horse that was jogging on so sociably beside his old mare. And as Charlie considered about Carrick to be very knowing in horses, besides being full private in the Royal Mallow Light Horses Volunteers, which every one of them mounted like real Hessians, he felt rather sanguine as to the result of his third attempt. "To be sure, that's a brave horse your honour rides," recommenced the preserving Charlie. "You may say that with your own ugly mouth," growled the head. Charlie, though not much flattered by the compliment, nevertheless chuckled at his success in obtaining an answer, and thus continued. "Maybe your honour wouldn't be after riding him across the country?" "Will you try me, Charlie?" said the head with an inexpressible look of ghastly delight. "Faith, and that's what I'd do," responded Charlie. "Only I'm afraid of the night being so dark, of laming the old mare, and I've every halfpenny of £100 on her heels." This was true enough. Charlie's courage was nothing dashed at the Headless Horseman's proposal, and there never was a steeplechase, nor fox chase, riding or leaping in the country that Charlie Cunane was not at all and foremost in. "Will you take my word," said the man who carried the head so snugly in his right arm, "for the safety of your mare?" "Done," said Charlie, and away they started, helter-skelter over everything, ditch and wall, pop, pop. The old mare never went in such style, even in broad daylight, and Charlie had just the start of his companion, when the voice called out, Charlie Culnane! Charlie! Man! Stop for your life! Stop! Charlie pulled up hard. Aye, he said, you may beat me by the head because it always goes so much before you, but if the bet was neck and neck, and that's the go between the old mare and Desdemona, I'd win it hollow. It appeared that the stranger was well aware of what was passing in Charlie's mind, for he suddenly broke out, quite loquacious. Charlie Culnane, says he, you have a stout soul in you, and are every inch of you a good rider. I've tried you, and I ought to know, and that's the sort of man for my money. 100 years it is since my horse and I broke our necks at the bottom of Kilcomer Hill, and ever since I've been trying to get a man that dared to ride with me, and never found one before. Keep, as you have always done, at the tail of the hounds. Never buck a ditch, nor turn away from a stone wall, and the Headless Horseman will never desert you, nor the old mare. Charlie, in amazement, looked towards the stranger's right arm for the purpose of seeing in his face whether or not he was in earnest. But behold, the head was snugly lodged in the huge pocket of the horseman's scarlet hunting coat. The horse's head had ascended perpendicularly above them, and his extraordinary companion, rising quickly after his avant courier, vanished from the astonished gaze of Charlie Culnane. Charlie, as it may be supposed, was lost in wonder, delight, and perplexity. The pelting rain, the wife's pudding, the new snaffle, even the match against Squire Jepson, all were forgotten. Nothing he could think of, nothing he could talk of, but the Headless Horseman. He told it directly that he got home to Judy. He told the following morning to all the neighbors. He told it to the hunt on St. Stephen's Day, but what provoked him after all the pains he took in describing the head, the horse, and the man, was that one and all attribute the creation of the Headless Horseman to his friend Con Buckley's ex-Water Parliament. This, however, should be told, that Charlie Culnane's old mare beat Mr. Jeffson's bay filly Desdemona by diamond, and Charlie pocketed his cool 100. And if he didn't win by means of the Headless Horseman, I am sure I don't know any other reason for his doing so. This has been The Headless Horseman by Thomas Crofton Croker, read by James Kidd of Uncharted North.